We often find that the more we try to eliminate our emotions and thoughts, the stronger they become. This statement opens the core spirit of Richard Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts *. Instead of fighting or expelling our internal fragments, he urges us to look directly at them with curiosity and compassion. The book presents the internal family systems, IFS, model, a psychological method that is also a philosophy of life. Each human being is a community of parts, and no part is inherently bad. Schwartz takes the reader from the familiar view of a singular self to a paradoxical but enlightening concept. We are many, and it is this very diversity that creates wholeness. Instead of continuing to suppress or drive away wounded parts, IFS teaches us how to listen, dialogue, and empower self, the deepest essence already present within each person, to lead. So what happens when we stop seeing anger, shame, or extreme desires as enemies and begin to view them as allies desperately trying to protect us? Is it perhaps in the acceptance of these unwanted parts that we find the door to healing and wholeness? Part 1. Internal Family Systems. From birth, we grow up with a deeply ingrained belief: humans have only one mind. Thoughts, emotions, and impulses are seen as emanating from a single centra unified self. I too once accepted this view, until I encountered real-life stories that shattered this picture. Ancient religious and philosophical doctrines contributed to shaping this monomind belief. From John Calvin's Doctrines of Original Sin to Freudian psychoanalysis with its view of human instincts as aggressive, selfish, and pleasure-seeking, all emphasize that within us lies a chaotic nature that needs to be suppressed and controlled. The consequence is that we see our inner urges, fears, or rages as proof of inherent depravity. But my experience with clients told a different story. I began to realize that each person has many internal parts, small entities with their own personalities, voices, and memories. They converse with each other, argue, and vie for roles. When you face a choice, isn't there often a part urging, "Go for it," while another pulls back, "Don't take risks"? This multiplicity is not a pathology but a natural state. This is the paradox. Society often views people with multiple personalities as abnormal, but in reality, all humans are multifaceted to varying degrees. The difference lies only in that for those who have suffered severe trauma, abuse, or neglect, their parts are more distinctly separated, extreme, and antagonistic. For most of us, these parts remain intertwined, not overtly obvious. What's worth noting is that the monomind concept instilled in us a fear of ourselves. When anxiety strikes, we immediately label ourselves as weak. When desire arises, we call ourselves sinful. Then we hate these parts, trying to drive them away with reason, discipline, or worse, self-blame. The result is that the more we try to suppress them, the more fiercely they rebel. These parts are not enemies. They are fragments that have had to contort themselves into roles in some harsh circumstance. The inner critic, seemingly utterly cruel, is actually trying to protect us from shame and failure. The part that makes us tremble before a crowd, afraid to step onto a stage, has actually borne memories of humiliation and fears repeating that past. However, having been trained by culture and religion for centuries, we continue to treat these parts as culprits. John Calvin once wrote, "Every part of man, from head to foot, is filled with sin, no part is exempt." These words haunted Western society, making people believe that every instinctual impulse needed to be restrained. Philosophers like Hobbes and Machiavelli also contributed to painting this pessimistic picture. Humans are selfish, greedy, violent creatures, and only laws and power can maintain order. In this context, any unusual emotion within us is immediately labeled negative. When anger surges, we tell ourselves, "I'm terrible." When we crave something, we try to stop it, "I'm weak." When we feel fear, we grit our teeth and force ourselves, "I must be strong." This very attitude creates a vicious cycle of will and shame. The more we suppress, the more the parts resist. They refuse to disappear because they are a part of us. Yet we are accustomed to seeing ourselves as a unified whole, so when a part arises, we identify with it. We no longer see any separation. We think, "I am a coward," instead of "a part of me is afraid." And then shame erodes us, leaving a spiral of self-hatred. We do not have just one self, and that truth is not as terrifying as we imagine. On the contrary, realizing that we are an internal community opens a path to liberation. Every part, no matter how bizarre or extreme, has a story to tell. If there is any culture that worships willpower and discipline to an extreme, it is American culture. From childhood, we are taught that self-control is a sign of strength, that failure is due to lack of determination. Self-help books, sports slogans, and even political speeches all echo the message: master yourself. The problem is that when we believe everything within us must obey a single ego, the rebellious parts become enemies. We try to curb cravings, suppress fears, and force weakness to disappear. Yet the tighter we squeeze, the more violently they resurface. I've met many people like this. They come to therapy after years of struggling with themselves. One woman recounted how she had been through countless rehab programs, tried every method, but each time sadness struck, a part inside her still urged her to turn to drugs. A successful businessman admitted that despite achieving all his life goals, a contemptuous voice still existed within him: "You're never good enough." This is not uncommon. In fact, almost everyone among us has an inner critic. It's like a shadow always lurking, reminding us that we are incompetent, weak, ugly. But if you look closely, you'll see it's not simply a saboteur. In many cases, the inner critic is actually protecting. It thinks that if it lets you dream or be indulgent, you will be hurt, you will fail, you will experience that same old feeling of humiliation. So it chooses to be cruel, knocking you down before the outside world can do it. The paradox here is that the more aggressive these parts are, the deeper the fear behind them. Imagine a child who is humiliated in front of the class. From that moment, a part of them carries that memory and the responsibility of protection. As they grow up, this part still lives in that moment, believing its mission is to prevent you from ever being humiliated again. So when you are about to speak in public, that part immediately surges forward, heart pounding, hands trembling, mind blank. You think you are shy, but in reality, it's just a part of you working overtime to keep you safe. I remember once working with a young man who was constantly driven to cut himself. On the outside, it looked like self-harm. But when I asked more deeply, a part within him blurted out, "I do it so he doesn't die. I do it to release some of the pain." That was the protector, a desperate but loyal part carrying the burden for the entire system. That's when I realized a truth that changed everything: no part is bad. There are parts that are pushed to the extreme, but deep down, they are still just trying to keep you alive. When we identify with these parts, when we let them blend with our whole being, we lose the broader perspective. We say, "I am a coward," instead of seeing that a part of me is afraid. This blending is what causes us suffering. But if we know how to unblend to tell ourselves, "This is a part of me, not all of me," then the door begins to open. I still clearly remember the early days of my therapy work, when young clients came to me with self-harming behaviors that I couldn't explain. A girl with an eating disorder, so thin that a gust of wind could knock her over, still adamantly refused to eat properly. I asked her why she did that to herself, and she answered with a silent shake of her head. At first, I thought my job was to persuade and compel them to give up those behaviors. With the girl's family, I devised all sorts of scientific diets, exercise schedules, and even punishments if she didn't comply. But everything failed. Every time there was progress, she would return to her old habits, sometimes even worse. One day, I changed my approach. Instead of fighting, I tried talking directly to the part controlling the behavior. I asked, "Which part of you makes you not want to eat?" And to my surprise, she whispered, "It says if I eat, I'll become hateful, I'll be abandoned." That was an illuminating moment. I began to realize that these self-harming behaviors were not enemies, but the voices of some part within the internal system. We call them exiles. On another occasion, a young man recounted that every time he was stressed, he would cut his arms. I was shocked. Why would you want to do something so painful? And when that part was allowed to speak, it replied, "I cut to release the torture inside. I do it so he doesn't die." That answer sent shivers down my spine. It turned out the part seen as self-destructive was actually a loyal soldier trying to protect its owner from another, even worse, pain. From then on, I no longer looked at extreme behaviors with condemnation. I started listening. I discovered that each part carried an untold story. There were parts that had been abandoned in childhood memories, carrying the fear of humiliation or hurt. There were parts that transformed into guards, ready to attack anyone to keep the system safe. And there were parts that chose silence, hiding, sacrificing themselves. When I sat with these parts, allowing them to express their reasons for existing, they often melted into tears and confessed, "We just wanted to protect. We didn't know any other way." That was the moment that changed my entire perception of the human mind. Previously, I believed the goal of therapy was to eliminate negative parts. But now I understood there's no need to eliminate. You can't eliminate them because they are a part of us. What they need is not eradication, but listening, compassion, and liberation from the extreme roles that the past forced them to bear. From that experience, I gradually developed the central concept. No part is bad, only parts that are pushed, trapped in traumatic memories, and forced to play extreme roles to keep us alive. When you change your perspective, instead of saying, "I self-harm," you will see that a part of me is desperately trying to protect. And when this separation forms, the path to healing begins to open. Working with enough clients, I noticed a recurring pattern. These extreme parts are always connected to a burden. They are not born to behave extremely, but because they carry something so heavy that it distorts them. Imagine a child growing up in a violent family. During one beating from his father, a part of that child takes on the shame and the belief that he is worthless. From then on, this part becomes a harsh protector, always preempting any opportunity for the child to be hurt further. But the cost is that it constantly whispers, "You're never good enough." Personal burdens are the beliefs, emotions, and memories that form directly from our traumatic experiences. They are often associated with specific events: a time of humiliation, a time of abandonment, a sudden accident. The part trapped in that memory doesn't know that time has passed. It still lives in that moment, reacting as if the tragedy is happening right now. Additionally, there are legacy burdens, things we inherit from family, culture, and society. Many people carry the belief that human worth comes only from productivity, from contribution, from obedience. These beliefs do not originate from the individual, but are the result of generations of transmission. For example, children growing up in a society obsessed with perfection often have parts that are constantly worried. If I don't perform excellently, I'll be discarded. I once spoke with an immigrant woman. She recounted that her parents, to survive in a foreign society, had to endure humiliation, work themselves to exhaustion, and always be vigilant. Parts within her inherited those beliefs intact. Even when circumstances had changed, she still carried the burden of having to work endlessly, or she would starve, despite living a comfortable life. It's important to remember that parts are not identical to their burdens. Like a pearl covered in mud, the bright essence still exists underneath. A part once considered an addict can return to being a part that loves life, yearns for connection. A part once an evil critic can become a dedicated guide, encouraging us forward. To achieve this, we must learn to separate the part from the burden it carries. When a part is allowed to tell its story, witnessed by the self, it gradually lets go of extreme beliefs. I have seen many parts, after being liberated, shed the mantra, "I am worthless," and return as fragments full of creativity, compassion, and intelligence. A young man once confessed, "There's a part in me that always urges me to drink. I hate it." But by listening, he discovered that part only wanted to numb the memories of abuse. After the journey together, that part cried, "I just don't want him to remember anymore." And when that burden was released, the addicted part transformed into a friend, urging him to connect with friends, find joy in music instead of alcohol. All of this leads to a fundamental realization. We cannot heal by eliminating parts, but only by liberating them from their burdens. Someone asked me, "But if a part has done something terrible, can it truly become good?" I have witnessed enough to answer, yes. Even those who have committed serious mistakes can rediscover their core qualities when burdens are removed, even in stories that seem hopeless. The seed of humanity still exists, it just needs to be given a chance. Many people often ask me, "You say no part is bad, but what about cruel criminals? What about parts that drive people to do terrible things?" These questions followed me to a special place, Oneida Academy in Illinois, a facility for juvenile sex offenders. Initially, I went there with the same fear and prejudice as society. I thought these were broken people, dangerous individuals who needed strict control. But as I began to talk with each of them, a different picture gradually emerged. One boy confessed to having abused others. When I asked the part within him to explain, it said, "I did it because I was forced to believe it was the only way to feel valuable." Behind the offender was a small, abandoned, humiliated part from childhood, so much so that it believed dominating others was the only way to survive. In another case, a boy who had committed severe violence, the aggressive part blurted out, "If I didn't attack first, it would kill me." I understood that this part lived forever in the memory of being beaten and abused by his father, always believing that the world was just a battlefield. What I saw at Ona Iga taught me a profound lesson. Even parts that have caused serious harm originate from an intention to protect. They are victims carrying the burdens of the past, forced to become perpetrators so as not to be crushed again. This is a difficult truth to swallow. If we simply label them as evil and try to eliminate them, we miss the opportunity for healing. I realize that when a harmful part is liberated from its burden, it can stop reoffending and even become a positive resource. Someone once considered dangerous can become deeply empathetic to the pain of others, knowing how to protect constructively instead of destructively. I'm not naive enough to think this is easy. Contact with these parts requires safety, requires boundaries. But if we truly listen, we will see the internal logic. Every part does what it believes is best to protect the system, even if the method is disastrous. This experience reinforced my belief: no part is bad. It's not a denial of criminal behavior, but an understanding that such behavior stems from a part imprisoned in traumatic memories. When that part is witnessed and freed, the cycle of violence can be broken. I remember a young man who had committed a serious crime. During a therapy session, when the aggressive part was asked, "If you didn't have to do this, what would you want?" It fell silent, then answered, "I just want him to be safe." That answer was enough to silence the entire room. Behind the monster's mask was still a child wanting to protect. And it is there that we see the essence of the entire healing journey, not a battle to destroy, but a process of liberation. The parts that once haunted us most, when freed, can become our most loyal allies. After years of working with all types of clients, I noticed something peculiar. There are moments, even amidst extreme chaos, when a distinct state emerges. It is not a part with fear or anger, nor a critical voice. It is a quiet, clear, compassionate presence. I call it self. Imagine the sky. Thick clouds can obscure the sun, but the sun is always present behind them, unwavering. Self is like that. Parts can overwhelm, obscure, and blend to the point where we think we have lost ourselves. But self never disappears, it is merely hidden. When self is present, you feel a unique set of qualities that I call the 8 Cs. Calmness, clarity, compassion, courage, curiosity, confidence, creativity, connectedness. These are not skills to be learned but natural states. When parts let go, when self leads, these qualities automatically radiate. I remember once working with a young girl whose parts were constantly quarreling. One part wanted to self-harm, another screamed for protection, another was submerged in shame. The whole room felt like a battlefield. I suggested she take a deep breath and then asked, "Is there a part that is observing all of this?" After a few minutes of silence, her eyes softened. She said, "Yes, it doesn't hate any of them, it just wants to listen." That was self-speaking. The key is to learn how to unblend. When a part is too strong, it blends with our entire being. We think, "I am this anger, I am this cowardice." But if we can step back and realize, "A part of me is angry," that distance opens the way for self to emerge. When self steps forward as the leader, the parts calm down. They no longer have to compete, no longer need to scream. Like a family with truly trustworthy parents, the children immediately feel more secure. Self not only listens, but also conveys certainty to the parts that they are not alone. Once, a client recounted that he felt a part within him wanted to sabotage his marriage, always urging him to cheat. Instead of shame and hatred, he tried to sit with self and ask, "What are you trying to do for me?" The part sighed, "I just want him to feel attractive, lovable again." When acknowledged, it stopped urging him to destroy and instead transformed that energy into creativity in rekindling love with his wife. This is the miracle of self. It doesn't need to suppress, doesn't need to command, it just needs to be present. And by doing so, it evokes trust in the parts. The parts, which are essentially children carrying burdens, finally find the true leader they have waited for all this time. The strange thing is that self is never contaminated by trauma. It can be obscured, blocked, but never damaged. This is the core of hope. No matter what tragedy you have experienced, there is an intact part within you, ready to step up and lead when given the opportunity. And it is in awakening self that the entire IFS journey can unfold, because only self is calm enough, compassionate enough, courageous enough to listen to and liberate the parts. After listening, understanding, and recognizing the presence of self, the next step is practice. I always emphasize that IFS is not just a theory, but an experiential path. You must directly dialogue with the parts, feel them to see the transformation happen. One of the first exercises I often use is to get to know a protector part. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and think of a recent situation that caused you stress. Notice which part arises most strongly. It might be a nagging voice, anxiety, or a sudden burst of anger. Instead of driving it away, try approaching it and whispering, "I see you. I want to know what frightens you." Many people are surprised by the answer they receive. Another practice is parts mapping. You can take paper and pen and write down all the parts you recognize: the critic, the rebel, the wounded child, the perfectionist. Then connect them with lines, showing who is protecting whom, who is against whom. Like drawing a family tree, you will begin to see the overall picture of your internal system. For easy visualization, I often use the metaphor of a garlic bulb. Each clove is like a separate part, with its own shape and flavor. They stick together to form the bulb, but no clove loses its identity. Similarly, our minds are a combination of many parts that come together to form a system, and at the center is self, like the core that holds everything together. In many therapy cases, I have witnessed the miraculous moment when a part realizes for the first time that it is not alone. A girl who had lived with the fear of abandonment broke down crying when talking to that part. It just wanted someone to promise not to leave it. And when self gently stepped forward and said, "I am here," that part immediately softened, like a child stopping trembling in its mother's arms. Practice is about becoming the internal father, the internal mother for all the parts within you. Instead of leaving them lost, silenced, or punished, you sit down, listen, and take responsibility for leading. From there, the parts no longer have to be extreme. They return to their original, creative, joyful, curious, loving roles. Does this process ever end? It's not a battle to win, but a long-term relationship. Like a family, there will always be moments of discord, but when self leads, the system finds balance. We are not unitary, but we are not divided. We are an internal community where every part deserves to be heard, and at the heart of that community, self is always present, peaceful, clear, compassionate. This is the foundation of the entire IFS journey, rejecting the monomind concept that has dominated for centuries and opening up a new perspective. Multiplicity is not a disease, but a door to healing and wholeness. Part 2, Self-leadership. Let us ask a straightforward question. What does healing and transformation truly mean in IFS? Many people come to therapy believing they are broken, that the parts that make them overeat are merely carnal instincts, or that intense trembling is just a symptom of an anxiety disorder. They think it's a disease, a defect, something to be eliminated. But the truth is entirely different. I want you to try to look at the extreme parts you despise. In reality, they are merely playing an overly heavy role. The part that forces you to drink is not just an addictive craving, but a desperate firefighter wanting to extinguish the flames of suffering. The part that makes you tremble is not your true nature, but just a child frozen in a past panic attack. Once you clearly see that, the burden of "I am sick, I am broken" gradually falls away. Instead, you understand that you simply have parts playing extreme roles. Imagine an alcoholic family. In that house, the eldest child becomes the hero, bearing responsibility. The second child is made the scapegoat, always taking the blame. Another child becomes the lost child, disappearing to avoid trouble. These roles do not reflect the children's true nature. If a good therapist were to step in and restructure the family, each child would be freed from their role and return to being themselves. Your inner world is the same. Parts are pushed into roles, labeled, and then stuck in those roles. But when liberated, they transform. The goal of IFS revolves around 4 key points. 1. Liberating parts from forced roles and restoring them to their natural state. 2. Restoring trust in self so that self becomes a reliable leader. 3. Reharmonizing the internal system, where parts begin to care for each other instead of clashing. 4. Finally, living under the guidance of self, no longer dominated by old burdens. This is what we call healing, not eliminating symptoms, but allowing parts to release their burdens. Many people ask why this process is so important, because as long as exiled parts carry burdens, the beliefs, I am worthless, I am shameful, I am abandoned, protector parts will be forced to work frantically to cover up the pain. And as long as that happens, we will continue to live in a spiral of useless anxiety, loneliness, and emptiness. A client once told me, I can't stop controlling. I feel like a dictator to myself. In our conversation, we discovered a part in her that believed if it didn't control, she would fall apart. But when that part was heard, witnessed, it sighed, I just want her to be safe. Afterward, it gradually relaxed, and that harsh control dissipated. That is the transformation. The part once seen as a dictator became a vigilant friend, reminding when necessary but no longer suffocating the entire system. When you understand this, you will see the difference. IFS does not ask you to eliminate any part. IFS simply guides you to the ability to liberate and reconnect. Look at the picture of families shattered by alcoholism, where each child is forced into harsh roles. One becomes the hero, trying to save the whole family with achievements and responsibilities. Another becomes the scapegoat, taking all the blame to reduce tension. And another disappears, becoming the lost child, retreating into the shadows to avoid pain. You see, those roles do not reflect the true nature of each child. They are merely survival strategies created in unjust circumstances. If a good therapist were to step in and reorganize the family, those children would be freed from their roles and slowly return to their natural selves. The human internal world operates in the same way. The parts within you are also pushed into roles that don't belong to them. A part is forced to become a cruel critic to keep you in line. Another part becomes a firefighter, rushing to put out fires at any cost, drinking, overeating, working to exhaustion just to hide the pain from the exiled parts. But when you approach them with curiosity and compassion, you will see a miracle. These parts long to be liberated. They are not born to forever play extreme roles. Their true nature is a positive resource, joy, creativity, freedom. It's just that they are stuck in the past, in the burdens that history has forced upon them. Remember, the 4 goals of IFS are the key to unlocking this process. 1. Liberate parts from forced roles. 2. Restore trust in self, so that self becomes a solid foundation. 3. Reharmonize the entire internal system, so that parts no longer conflict. 4. Finally, live a life guided by self. This process I call healing and transformation. Not healing as a technical operation, but a radical change in how parts understand their roles. Another example, I once met a man who believed he was a failure. Within him, a part constantly whispered, "You're never good enough." When we sat down and gave that part a chance to speak, it confessed that it had carried this belief since he was 6 years old, after being humiliated by a teacher in front of the class. In that moment, that part thought that if it kept reminding him, "You're not good enough," he would never dare to dream too big and would avoid repeating the humiliation. When self appeared, that part was witnessed, embraced, and gradually understood that the memory belonged to the past. It sighed and released the burden. Then something strange happened. The part that had played the cruel critic transformed into a subtle part, helping him set reasonable standards, motivating him to progress without crushing him. This is transformation, and this transformation does not come from coercion but from liberation. You can see that if you were born into a perfectly harmonious family and culture, your parts would probably never be forced into roles. They would cooperate smoothly, care for each other, and connect deeply with self. And in that harmony, you would hardly notice the individual existence of each part because they flow together. But most of us are not so lucky. We live with parts carrying burdens, parts playing wrong roles. That is why IFS is necessary. To dismantle those roles, to help parts breathe again and return to their original state. After understanding that parts are not enemies but merely trapped in roles, the next step is to see the power of self when present in action. This is when everything begins to change fundamentally. Remember, self is not another part of the system. It is the foundational essence, like the vast sky, untainted by trauma. When parts let go and make space, self steps up, and the entire internal atmosphere changes. You can clearly feel it. A pervasive sense of peace, clarity emerging, compassion rising, and a natural courage developing. I remember the story of Ethan. He sought therapy because his marriage was fracturing. Inside him was a battle. One part was uncontrollably angry, another desperately wanted to leave, and another begged to save the family. Each time he faced his wife, these parts surged forward in turn, making him unable to communicate normally. When we began to work, I invited him to try to step back, to observe instead of embodying a part. At first, he said, "I can't. The anger swallows me whole." But after a moment of deep breathing, he exclaimed, "There's another part. It's not angry, it just wants to understand." That was self. When self was present, the voice within him softened. He began to see that the angry part only wanted to protect him from feeling disregarded. The desperate part only wanted to avoid a hopeless fight, and the pleading part only longed for love. As self listened to each part, they began to trust. The anger no longer screamed, the desperation ceased to pull, and the longing for love became a motivation to find solutions instead of giving up. This is the power of self in action. It does not suppress, it does not command. It simply needs to be present, listen, and provide certainty. As a result, his entire internal system changed. Ethan, for the first time, could talk to his wife without exploding or giving up. He became a different person, not because the parts disappeared, but because they were led by self. If you ask how I know self is truly present, you will see it through clear qualities. You feel curiosity instead of judgment. You feel compassion instead of contempt. You find clarity instead of confusion, and especially, you feel a connection not only with the parts within you but also with others. When self steps in, parts no longer need to fight for control. Like a family with strong enough parents, the children stop yelling, and the internal system finds balance. That moment was a turning point. He realized that he was not the anger nor the despair. He was self, the essence that could embrace both and lead them. From here, his marriage was no longer dictated by extreme parts, but by self's ability to guide. Sarah came to me in a state of near exhaustion. She was a mother of two, working full-time and juggling family responsibilities. Inside her was a mess of parts. One stressed part constantly demanded perfection in everything, another was resentful, falling into despair, and an aggressive part was always ready to explode when someone added to her burden. Initially, Sarah's parts didn't trust anyone. The perfectionist part said, "If I don't hold on tight, she'll collapse." The depressed part whispered, "Everything's hopeless anyway." And the aggressive part bellowed, "It's best if no one comes near." It was a complete defensive wall. I invited Sarah to try to find if there was another place within her that didn't carry such extreme energy. After a period of silence, she exhaled, "There's something that doesn't judge, isn't tired, it just wants to listen." That was self. From that moment, everything changed. Self didn't confront, didn't dismiss, it only listened and acknowledged. It said to the perfectionist part, "Thank you for keeping everything in order for so long, but now you can rest a bit." It looked at the depressed part and whispered, "I understand your sadness and I am here." It approached the aggressive part, "I see you've protected with strength, but you don't have to fight alone anymore." The other parts gradually calmed down. They didn't disappear but laid down their weapons, allowing Sarah to breathe for the first time in years. In the presence of self, she no longer felt fragmented but connected. From Sarah's experience, I realized something deeper. Self not only impacts internally, but also radiates externally. I call this phenomenon contagion, the spreading of energy. Imagine an organization where the leader is blended with a harsh protector part. He dictates, controls, and micromanages every detail. Immediately, the employees' own defensive parts are activated. Some rebel, some withdraw, others pretend to comply. Before long, the entire organizational culture is tinged with defensive energy. Conversely, when the leader approaches from self, the atmosphere changes completely. Self radiates peace and connection, making the parts in others feel safe enough to relax. Like one string on a musical instrument vibrating and causing another nearby string to resonate, the presence of self awakens self in others. I witnessed this in Sarah's own family. When she approached her son with a self-like tone, calm, curious, compassionate, the boy, who was usually quick to anger without cause, began to calm down. Instead of arguing back, he blurted out, "Mom, I'm just afraid you'll leave me." That was the first time mother and son touched the real fear instead of getting stuck in a battle of parts. This is proof of self's power in action. It doesn't just change one person, but spreads to the entire surrounding system. When a person steps in from self, the whole space becomes safer. And in that safety, aggressive, fearful, or depressed parts begin to release their burdens. When parts have released their burdens and begun to trust, a new door opens. The IFS process doesn't just stop at healing old wounds, but also leads us to another depth, the ability to live under the guidance of self with clear vision and purpose. When you are no longer haunted by voices like, "You're not good enough," "You will fail," or "You must hide," you have internal space to listen to a different question. What do I truly want? What was I born to do? This is not romantic illusion, but a natural emergence when self leads. In the self state, we feel a flow directed towards service, not control. That is why I use the concept of self-leadership. It sounds contradictory. How can a leader be selfless? But in fact, this is the most sustainable form of leadership. This idea is similar to the servant leadership model in the business world. Robert Greenleaf, the originator of that concept, once wrote that the true leader begins with the desire to serve others. From that desire, they become a leader. This is completely contrary to the type of leadership that starts from a craving for power or possession. The easily observable difference is that leadership from self does not need to prove itself, does not need to impose. Self-leaders care whether the people they serve become freer, clearer, healthier. And they live with that question as their guiding principle. However, there is an important caveat. Many people believe they are leading from self, but are actually overwhelmed by manager parts. That's when a caretaker part within them is overloaded, sacrificing themselves to exhaustion. The result is burnout, bitterness, and emptiness. Such leadership is not from self, but from a part playing an overstretched role. Conversely, true leadership from self does not mean unconditional sacrifice. It is a balance where self cares for all parts within as well as all people outside. And precisely because of this, it is sustainable. I once worked with a successful businessman. He led his company with such tight control that the entire team was always stressed. When he entered therapy, he discovered he was blended with a protector part. This part believed that if it didn't control, everything would fall apart. But when self appeared, he realized he could trust his employees, empowering them instead of shackling them. The result was not only his own relief from pressure, but also the company's flourishing. This is strange but true. The personal vision also spreads into the culture of the larger system: family, community, organization. When self leads, it awakens self in others, and from that, a positive cycle is formed. Purpose is no longer confined to healing wounds, but expands into a vision for living, a meaningful life guided by clarity and compassion. When I observe larger systems, families, work teams, organizations, I notice an undeniable phenomenon. The energy of parts or of self spreads. I call it resonance. Imagine a leader blended with a controlling protector part. He carries tense, demanding, vigilant energy. Immediately, those around him feel it, and their own defensive parts are activated. Some resist, some withdraw, others pretend to comply. Before long, the entire organization becomes a heavy, suffocating place. Conversely, when the leader operates from self, the atmosphere changes markedly. Their peace, curiosity, and compassion make the parts in others feel safe. They no longer have to be tense and defensive, and self within them also has an opportunity to emerge. Like a vibrating string causing another nearby string to resonate, self also creates synchronization. This is not just a metaphor. Physicists have demonstrated that everything in the universe vibrates, and when two objects are placed near each other, they tend to synchronize their oscillation. Humans are the same. When one person is present from self, others begin to synchronize with that frequency. I once saw this in a family meeting. The parents were blended with angry parts. The child immediately retreated into a fearful, avoidant part. But when the mother took a deep breath to allow self to speak, her tone calm and curious, the child also changed. He stopped shrinking and for the first time dared to speak the truth. "Mom, I'm just afraid you'll leave me." This is the miracle of self-resonance. It doesn't need theory, doesn't need strategy, it just needs presence. That presence is like a magnetic field, calming the entire system. However, there is also a downside to this. If you don't realize that you are blended with a protector part, you can unintentionally spread that defensive energy to your entire family or work group. That is why self-awareness and unblending are so important. When you know you are being dominated by a part, you can step back to let self speak. And only then can positive resonance occur. A client of mine, a company director, once complained that his team was always tense and conflicted. After a process of work, he realized that he often entered meetings in a state blended with a perfectionist and critical part. When he began to change, sitting down and breathing to let self lead, he realized the entire atmosphere also changed. Employees began to trust, became more creative, and conflicts significantly decreased. This is proof of the power of resonance. Self not only heals internally, but also radiates externally, transforming the entire surrounding system. By now you understand that self is not an abstract concept, but a presence that can be felt, invited, and practiced. But for self to become a sustainable leader, you need specific training methods. That is why I include simple yet powerful exercises. One of them is the fire drill. Normally, when swept away by a stressful situation and argument, an aggressive email, a frightening event protector, parts immediately rush to take control. You react with anger, withdrawal, or flight. A fire drill is how you practice beforehand. Imagine an emergency situation about to happen, then observe which parts appear. Instead of letting them overwhelm you, try saying, "I see you, thank you for the warning, but let self handle this." With repeated practice, you will gradually build the habit of automatically inviting self to step in, even in the midst of a storm. Another practice is sorrow meditation. You choose a part that is carrying sadness, often an exiled part from old memories. Instead of avoiding or forcing it to be silent, you sit with it. You listen to the story it carries, letting it know that self is here, not abandoning it. Sometimes, just that presence is enough for the part to begin gently releasing its burden. Someone asked me, why go to all this trouble? Couldn't stronger willpower just fix it? But willpower belongs to the manager parts, and they too often get exhausted. Self is different. Self does not need to prove strength. Self simply needs to be present, and from that presence, the entire system truly trusts and transforms. I have seen this happen many times. A woman struggled with chronic anxiety. Every time she left the house, the fearful part in her would scream that something terrible would happen. She tried to use reason to reassure herself, but it was useless. Only when she sat down and let that fearful part know that self was here, that it no longer had to guard alone, did the anxiety gradually subside. After a few weeks of practice, that anxious part no longer had to scream but became a friend, reminding her to pay attention to safety in a calm way. Self-leadership does not only occur in special moments but needs to be practiced every day. Like a muscle, self becomes stronger through regular practice. When you get to know your parts, when you map your internal world, when you practice fire drills or sorrow meditation, you are training the entire system to trust self. And when that trust is strong enough, you step into everyday life no longer dominated by impulses or old burdens. A life where self becomes the internal leader, not through power or imposition, but through presence, compassion, and vision. Part 3: Self in the Body and the World. There is a paradox that took me years to realize. The people or situations that cause us the most suffering are often our deepest teachers. I call them torment mentors, a combination of torment and mentor. It sounds like a harsh pun, but it's precisely true. They torment us by continuously touching unhealed wounds, forcing us to look at the parts we try to avoid. Think back in your life, parents, spouses, children, colleagues, or even a stranger. There may have been times when you thought they were the source of your suffering, but if we look from an IFS perspective, we see it differently. They are merely mirrors, reflecting the hidden parts within us. I experienced this with my own parents. How many times did I find myself exploding at their criticism, believing the cause was them? But when I stepped back and observed, I realized that it was a part within me, a part that longed for recognition but never received it, that was truly writhing. My parents had only accidentally touched it. Similarly, in marriage, a partner can become the greatest torment mentor. People often say, if it weren't for him/her, I wouldn't be this miserable. But in reality, the anger or hurt that flares up doesn't come from the other person, but from parts that have been exiled within us for a very long time. My wife, in many moments, activated parts I thought I had buried deep. At first, I thought she was unfair, but then I clearly saw that those extreme reactions were signs of exiles, parts crying out to be seen. Even my own clients have been torment mentors. Whenever they refused, resisted, or expressed anger towards me, parts within me also surged up. The part afraid of failure, the part yearning for recognition. Instead of viewing them as burdens, I learned to step back and listen to myself. This is an important paradox. The people we want to avoid most are often the gateway back to self, because they force our parts to surface, whether we want them to or not. If we are alert enough not to blend, if self can observe, then those activations become opportunities for healing. That is why I call torment mentors teachers in disguise. They are not kind, not gentle. Sometimes they are even cruel. But the lessons they bring are real. Every pain is a path leading us back to our exiled parts. Many people ask me, how can I know who a torment mentor is? The simple answer is, they are the person whose mere presence makes you feel anger surge, anxiety swell, or despair overwhelm. They are the person who makes you react strongly, out of proportion to the situation. It is there that an exiled part is trembling behind the scenes. In IFS, the important thing is not to eliminate torment mentors from your life, but to learn how to use them as a map. Every time you are activated, ask yourself, which part of me was just touched? What is it afraid of? By doing so, you are no longer thrown into an emotional spiral, but transform the situation into an opportunity to access your deepest parts. This is the beginning of a larger practice, advanced parts mapping. You don't just list known parts, but also observe who is activated by whom is protecting whom, and which external torment mentor made that part surface. The more detailed you draw it, the more you will see that your internal system is not just a separate group, but a dynamic network intimately connected to the surrounding world. Every time a torment mentor appears, what often happens is that protector parts immediately jump to the front lines. You are criticized by a colleague in front of others. Immediately, an angry part surges with a desire for revenge, while another part tries to suppress it, trembling with fear of losing face. You are ignored by a loved one, the wounded part screams, "I am worthless," and the protector part immediately builds a cold wall. The danger is not in the reactions themselves, but in the fact that they often blend with your entire being. When blended, you no longer see the boundary between yourself and the part. You think, "I am useless." Instead of seeing that it's just a desperate part, you exclaim, "I want to destroy everything," forgetting that it's just an angry part screaming. When blended, self disappears from the frame, and at that moment you react blindly, repeating old scripts. That's why arguments continue, conflicts at work recur, and we always feel trapped in a loop. But if in that moment you can step back, a miracle happens. You are no longer carried away. You clearly see, a part of me is angry, instead of "I am this anger." This small distinction opens a safe space for self to step in. From the self position, you can observe without judgment and ask, what is this part trying to protect? Is there an exile trembling behind it? Often, behind the anger is an exiled part carrying memories of humiliation. Behind the anxiety is an abandoned child. The external torment mentor merely accidentally pushes the right button, making them surface. This is the crucial point. Torment mentors are the switches that awaken exiles. Without them, we would easily maintain our protective shell, pretending everything is fine. But thanks to them, we are forced to confront what we try to hide. To support this process, I recommend practicing advanced parts mapping as a regular habit. Instead of just writing down the names of parts, draw how they connect in activated situations. For example, when criticized by a boss, the angry part steps forward, the fearful part shrinks behind, and the self-doubting part, which is an exile, trembles in a dark corner. At the same time, you can add the external torment mentor. The map gradually reveals the dynamic relationships. You will notice an interesting thing. Protector parts often cooperate or clash with each other. The angry part and the perfectionist part might form an alliance to keep you from failing. The anxious part and the avoidant part might take turns controlling you. When you map the whole picture, you see that the internal system is not just a collection of separate entities, but a complex network of strategies. And precisely while observing that map, yourself is also being invited to step in. Because to map, you must step back, unblend, and see the parts as characters in a painting. That is already a self-practice. In daily life, triggers activating situations appear constantly. It could be someone's cold glance, a casual criticism, or simply a familiar tone of voice that you heard in the past. These seemingly small things touch the most sensitive nerves, causing you to react intensely and out of proportion. If you don't understand this mechanism, you will easily blame the person in front of you entirely. "He's insolent. She looks down on me. They always want to undermine me." But within the IFS framework, we know that a trigger is just a key that opens the door to exiled parts. I remember a client. He would violently explode every time a colleague edited his work. He insisted, "They look down on me." But when I invited him to sit back and observe that reaction as a part, he gradually realized that behind the anger was an exile carrying childhood memories. As a child, he had been criticized by his father in front of his classmates. When a colleague offered feedback, the child within him relived that moment, trembling with fear and humiliation. The angry part simply rushed to shield that child. This is a rule. Every time you overreact, it's a sign that an exiled part is being touched. A trigger doesn't create new pain, it just reopens an old wound. So how do we work with triggers? The first step is to recognize them. When you find yourself reacting strongly, stop and whisper, "This is a trigger." Just that sentence is enough for self to step in, helping you not to identify with the anger or fear. The next step is to unblend. You try to observe the rebellious part. "I see you are angry," or "I see you are afraid." Just changing from "I am" to "I see" opens up space. Then comes listening. You ask that part, "What are you trying to protect? Is there someone else behind you?" Often, the protector will show you the exile it is sheltering. And when that exile is witnessed by self, the external outburst will subside. This is a practice that requires patience because our instinct is always to counterattack or flee immediately. But if you dare to sit with it, the trigger transforms into an opportunity. You are no longer a victim of the situation, but become an active explorer of your internal world. I myself have experienced this. In a workshop, a colleague publicly refuted my opinion. Immediately, a part within me flared up. "He looks down on me." But when I stepped back, I realized that behind it was a small exile still hurting from adolescence, when a teacher had ridiculed me in front of the class. Only then did I understand that my anger was not directed at my colleague, but at an old, unhealed pain. To support this process, I often suggest practicing, working with triggers as a daily habit. Write down at least one situation that activated you, what part arose, what it was protecting, and which exile was behind it. Gradually, you will have a vivid map of how your internal system operates in response to triggers, and most importantly, you will see a clear truth. Torment mentors don't actually harm you. They merely flip the switch for hidden parts to speak up. If self is present, every activation is an opportunity for healing. When observing hundreds of internal systems, I realized that they adhere to immutable principles, just as nature obeys the laws of physics. You cannot negotiate with gravity, and you cannot avoid these internal laws. Understanding them will stop you from blaming yourself for being weak or out of control. Instead, you learn to work with reality. The first law: the more you suppress a part, the stronger it returns. Like compressing a spring, the tighter you squeeze, the more violently it recoils. Many people believe that through willpower they can force fear or anger to disappear, but in reality, the suppressed part only retreats to deeper levels, waiting for an opportunity to erupt. And when it returns, it is often more extreme than before. The second law: inhibited energy will find an outlet elsewhere. If you silence an anxious part, that energy can transform into obsessive-compulsive behavior or manifest as physical symptoms. Stomach pain, headaches, insomnia. The body becomes the place where that part sends its message when the mind refuses to listen. The third law: parts operate like an ecosystem. They connect, interact, forming a complex network. Suppressing one part can lead to distortion in another, just as when you eliminate one species in nature, the entire ecosystem is affected. Once I worked with a client who carried intense anger. He tried to suppress it, meditating for hours just to drive the anger away. But the anger didn't disappear. It returned in a different form. He suffered from chronic migraines. When we allowed that angry part to speak, it just cried, "I've been protecting for too long." And as soon as it was witnessed, the headaches began to subside. That is proof of the law: energy does not disappear, it merely transforms. One more law: protector parts are often stuck in time. They behave as if the old trauma is still happening. A part that once saved you from humiliation at age 5 still reacts the exact same way when you are 40 and receive a small piece of feedback. It doesn't know that time has passed. To heal, you must show it that the present is different from the past. This is why superficial attempts at control often fail. You can make plans, force yourself, implement discipline. But if you don't work directly with the system of parts, they will still operate according to their own internal laws. Understanding these laws, we stop seeing ourselves as weak or abnormal. Instead, we see ourselves simply living within a system with rules, and our task is to learn how to work with those rules instead of fighting against them. Andy came to me with a heavy face, his voice tinged with weariness and resignation. He recounted that he had tried everything to control his addictions and extreme emotions, but it all only made things worse. The more he tried to suppress, he sighed, the more violently they flared up. Throughout the therapy session, I had the opportunity to observe firsthand how the internal laws of physics operate. When a part is suppressed, it doesn't disappear. It just accumulates energy, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. Andy had an addictive part, a part that always urged him to seek numbing pleasures to escape. He hated it, suppressed it with discipline, prayer, and shame. But like a tightly compressed spring, that part bounced back with multiplied force, pulling him deeper after each failure. In the session, I invited Andy to stop suppressing and try to listen to that addictive part. Initially, it appeared in a rage, "I won't let you control me anymore." But when Andy's self emerged, calm and curious, the addictive part gradually lowered its voice. It said, "I just want him to escape the feeling of worthlessness. Without me, he would drown in shame." Behind that addictive part was an exile carrying memories from childhood. As a boy, he had been humiliated by his father in front of his friends, heard condemning words like, "You're worthless." That exile was still stuck, and the addictive part was the firefighter rushing to put out the fire by any means, whether it was stimulants, dangerous pleasures, or self-harm. Through Andy, I clearly saw another law: inhibited energy will flow elsewhere. When the addictive part was suppressed, that energy didn't disappear. It overflowed into other parts, creating anxiety, insomnia, and even physical pain. In this process, we practiced an important step, protector work, not simply saying, "Step back," but creating a trusting relationship. I encouraged Andy to dialogue directly with the addictive part. "I know you've worked very hard to protect me. I know you don't mean harm, and I want to work with you to find another way to protect." When a protector part feels trust and respect, it begins to relax. It realizes that self is strong enough to take on the burden. That was the moment the protector part laid down its weapons. Andy sat there, tears falling. He said, "I never thought this part could be my friend." And that was the turning point. From an enemy to be destroyed, the addictive part became an ally, agreeing to step back when self was present. Instead of fighting the protector, we cooperate with it. We show it that its mission is complete, that self is now capable of leading. And as a result, Andy no longer had to struggle frantically to control. When self led, the addiction no longer overwhelmed. It still lingered faintly, but no longer dominated. Andy's system, for the first time, found the balance he had desperately sought for so many years. Up to this point, we have seen self in the role of the internal leader. It heals exiles, listens to protector parts, and restores balance. But if self only exists as a notion in the mind, the process is incomplete. Self needs to be embodied. Embodied means being experienced and expressed through this very body. The body is not just a shell containing the mind, it is a gateway to the internal world. Every part leaves its mark on the body. An anxious part makes your shoulders stiff as stone. An angry part constricts your throat. A wounded part makes your heart heavy. And conversely, when self is present, the body becomes a place where you feel peace, openness, and connection. I often invite clients to practice a simple step: stop and pay attention to body sensations in the present moment. Are you clenching your fists without knowing it? Are you holding your breath due to tension? Do you feel your stomach tight every time you hear someone's voice? All these signs are the whispers of the parts. But embodiment is not just about recognizing tension. It is also the ability for self to radiate through every gesture, every breath, every glance. When self is present, your voice is calm, your eyes are warm, your breath is slow, and the person opposite you immediately feels safe being near you. Many people think that to access self, they have to meditate for hours, separating themselves from daily life. But embodiment shows the opposite. Self is present precisely when you are talking, driving, cooking, hugging a child. Self is not about hiding in a cave, but about living fully in the body, right in the midst of the world. I remember a client named Maria, who always felt alienated from her own body. She recounted that for years she felt as if she only lived in her head, constantly thinking, endlessly judging. For her, the body was a dwelling place for suffering, illness, and memories of abuse. When we began to practice embodiment, the first step was simply to place her hand on her chest and feel her heartbeat. She burst into tears. "I've never truly been in my body." Gradually, as her self learned to stay present, the parts that had detached from her body also returned. Embodiment is the affirmation that healing doesn't only happen in the mind, but also in every cell. You cannot say, "I am peaceful," while your body remains rigid. Self is only truly self in the relaxation of the shoulders, the gentleness of the gaze, the softness in every movement. Once this happens, you begin to feel something strange. The body is no longer an enemy, no longer a place containing symptoms to be fixed. It becomes a companion, a compass signaling whenever you stray from self, and a home welcoming you back. TJ was a man in his 30s who felt alienated from his own body. He recounted that every time he looked in the mirror, he felt like he was seeing someone else. His body was stiff, his breathing labored, and sometimes he even felt like he was floating outside his body. These symptoms were not random. They were the consequence of years of parts within him trying to detach from the body to avoid traumatic memories. In the session, I invited TJ to close his eyes and simply bring his attention to his breath. Initially, the parts resisted fiercely. One part said, "Being in the body is dangerous." Another whispered, "You'll be hurt again." But TJ's self had learned to listen. He didn't force, didn't argue, just said, "I understand. I know you're afraid, but let me just try to touch the breath a little." When that fragile agreement appeared, TJ flushed. He whispered, "I feel a little warmth." That was the first signal of embodiment. As self reconnected with the body through the simplest sensations, the parts were initially wary. But when they saw that self didn't abandon them, they gradually allowed him to stay in his body longer. Then an exile surfaced, a boy who had been abused, carrying the fear that the body was only a place where pain happened. The boy had pushed TJ out of his body for many years, but when embraced by self, he gradually understood that the present was different. In tears, TJ said, "I never felt safe in my body until today." This is the power of embodiment. Self is not just clear thinking, but presence in every heartbeat, every breath. And when self is in the body, the entire internal system becomes more stable. Parts no longer have to scream to alarm because they know self is right here, feeling everything. To strengthen this process, I often introduce the body meditation exercise. It's not complicated. You just need to spend a few minutes each day. You sit quietly, breathe deeply, and bring your attention sequentially through each part of your body: shoulders, chest, abdomen, legs, hands. In each place, you ask, "Is there any part here that wants to be heard by me?" Sometimes the answer is tension, sometimes a fleeting memory, and sometimes just a warm sensation. Whatever appears, you simply allow self to witness it without judgment. This practice does two things. First, it helps you no longer abandon your body, transforming it into a safe dwelling place instead of a battlefield. Second, it opens a direct channel of communication with the parts, because many parts can only speak through the body. As you maintain body meditation, you will notice subtle changes. Your gait becomes less tense, your voice slows down, and others feel more comfortable around you. Because self is no longer just in your head, it has permeated every fiber of your being, every gesture. Healing does not only happen in thoughts or emotions, but must touch the entire person, mind, body, and how we are present in the world. When self can lead all three of these dimensions, we truly live in wholeness. Thank you for patiently journeying through this book, listening this far. I believe that within you, not only a new idea about the mind has resonated, but also a different experience. You no longer see yourself as a singular, enclosed entity, but as a vibrant community, where every part yearns to be heard and liberated. If what you have just heard has sparked a glimmer of light, a movement within you, I hope you will leave a comment about the book, not to affirm its value, but to extend this conversation in many other directions where your voice becomes a part of the shared journey. And I want to invite you to join the next step, suggesting books you wish to hear in the future. Consider this an opportunity for you to bring your deepest parts into a broader dialogue. Because each of your suggestions is not just a name but a signal, this is what I need to continue my internal journey. We have reached the end of this book, but the path is still long. The parts within you will continue to speak, and self will still be present, waiting for you to return. I bid you farewell here and hope to meet again on future journeys.